This is Distant Replay, the podcast that goes back in time to relive all the greatest events that we witnessed in sports. From upsets, to championships, to cultural moments, we discuss it all. Coming up on today's episode.
Miller for three, and he got it. Reggie Miller with a clutch tray, and it's 105-102. And a steal. Miller retreats to the three-point line and hits again. Tie game.
Well, we're going back to May 7th, 1995. That is the day that the Knicks and the Pacers squared off in the Eastern Conference Semifinals, the third straight year that these two teams had met in the postseason of the NBA. Second year without Jordan, quotation marks. He does come back later in the season, but it was still kind of a transition period for the Bulls. And the Knicks and Pacers tried to make it to the finals to try to get a shot at a championship. And this rivalry has been well discussed, well documented, and we're diving into this game tonight on Distant Replay. Welcome in. I'm Ben George. He's Mike Noto. Mike, we did the documentary recap on Winning Time, 30 for 30 on Reggie Miller versus the New York Knicks. So we've got into this rivalry quite a bit. But having watched that, it kind of set us up for, hey, we need to go back and watch game one of this Eastern Conference Semifinals because it's one of the ones that we always think about and talk about.
Yeah, we remember this game for what happened at the ending sequence, which we'll get to. But I think this game had lasting impacts on not only this rivalry, but also the direction these two teams would go in afterwards. So I thought it was a good one to do.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's a lot to get into on this game. It was definitely different than I expected going back and watching it. And we're going to get into all that tonight. Broadcasting crew, the actual broadcast that we're going to post is a feed from essentially like the feed from the broadcast without commercials, but you get to hear the talent talking in between commercials, which was interesting as well. And this game played out in a very interesting fashion. We know what happened at the very end with Reggie Miller taking over to close it out in the choke job by the Knicks. So if you haven't joined us before, you can find us online, distantreplaypodcast.com, on YouTube as well. Please hit that subscribe button for us, like the video, leave us a comment. We'd appreciate all those things. But also on Twitter and Instagram, you can find us as well. Connect with us there. So into this game, Mike, again, if you want to know more about the rivalry itself between the Pacers and Knicks, this very short-lived rivalry in the mid-'90s, early 90s, go back to one of our previous episodes, just an episode or two before this. What episode, actually? Documentary recap on the Winning Time. We go into this rivalry a lot more. But let's put that aside, and won't get into that quite as much for this show. Let's talk more about this season, 1995. So what do you remember about this, Mike? You're a Knicks fan, well documented here on the show. What do you remember about this season and about heading into this series?
Heading into this series, the way I always thought of it was there was tremendous amount of pressure on both these teams, but more notably, both of the star players. So from Reggie Miller's standpoint, it's like, hey, look, you have a fun time, you trash talk, but when it comes down to it, you blew a 3-2 lead last year to the Knicks in the conference finals. Can you get over this hump and beat the Knicks, right? That was a legitimate thing for Reggie Miller. We went through in our previous episode how they've had trouble winning in Madison Square Garden up to this point. Then from the Knicks standpoint, there is even more pressure on Patrick Ewing because the Knicks, again, we're in this window, quote, without Michael Jordan, right? The year before, they make it to the finals. He can't get past Olajuwon and the Rockets, not putting the whole loss on Ewing, but, in the NBA, these marquee players are judged by championships. Now coming into 95, it's, okay, we have another chance here to win a championship. We think we're primed to do so. So I thought, this series and how it plays out, and most notably this game, just played a huge role in the legacy of Ewing especially.
Well, the season standings this year, to give you an idea of what these teams look like, you had the Magic in the East with the best record with 57 wins. Knicks right behind them at 55. Pacers had 52. They were on top of their division. On the other side, you had the Spurs, best record in basketball with 62 wins. David Robinson was the MVP that year. And Utah with 60 wins right behind them. The Rockets only had 47 wins, Mike. That to me, when I saw that, was pretty surprising knowing what we know now.
Yeah. So I had forgotten about that as well until I did some research. And what's nuts about that, Ben, is you mentioned the Spurs. I mean, the Spurs are in a situation where they have the most 62 wins, I think you just said.
Yeah.
And a couple of years later, they're in a position to draft Tim Duncan. So
yeah.
It's just nuts from their franchise point of view and how things sort of evolved. But yeah, and remember, the Magic are sort of bursting on the scene at this point. So this is the Shaq Penny Magic team, and now we're lined up to where one of these two teams is going to play them in the conference finals.
Yeah, there was 5 teams in the West alone had a better record than the Rockets, which is crazy to think about. But yeah, and you mentioned the Magic. The Magic were 39-2 at home and 18-23 on the road.
The Arena.
Yeah. So that's an interesting season indeed. But all eyes on the Knicks and the Pacers. And heading into this series, I mean, it's a big deal because of what you mentioned the year before, and there's a lot of pressure on both of these teams heading into it. And I don't know what else there honestly is to kind of set this up, Mike. This comes on the heels of us doing this whole documentary. It's really fresh in my mind, more so than any other game because of everything we've seen and witnessed to get here. I mean, you had the Spike Lee, obviously kind of the showdown with Reggie the year prior leading into this. So there's a lot of drama heading into this series with these two.
Yeah, and now Spike Lee is full in John Starks jersey, right? So this is the John Starks jersey era of Spike Lee at the Garden because of how, as we went into last episode, how Starks bailed him out in Game 6 in Market Square the year before. So that's where we're at with Spike Lee. And like you mentioned, this game is so much more than just that ending sequence, and I can't wait to get into it.
Bring us up to speed on how both these teams got here. It's early in the playoffs, but what did both these teams do early on?
Yeah, so remember, this is the Eastern Conference Semifinals. So each team played one round before this. The Pacers easily handled the Hawks 3-0 in the first round, and likewise, the Knicks handled the Cavaliers 3-1 here in the first round to set the scene for Game 1.
This is Game 1, May 7th, being played in Madison Square Garden. Knicks had home court advantage, a packed house in MSG, and we get the broadcast from NBC. And again, every time I see these old NBC games with the NBA, Mike, I wish we could go back to those eras, and I wish we could have NBC getting these games on Sundays. I remember like Sundays being the day, right? You get home from like church or you're spending time with the family, and boom, you hear that music in the background.
Yeah, that music is just, even just like either ESPN or TNT. I don't know if NBA on NBC owns the rights to that music. I don't know how that works, but one of them should try to get it because it'd be instant social media attention for whoever got it. It's just great, and it brings people back, you know?
It does. And this broadcast featured Tom Hammond, Bill Walton, with Dan Hicks on the sideline. Interesting crew here.
Dan Hicks not doing – the only thing I know Dan Hicks for is doing swimming at the Olympics.
Yeah.
So I equate his voice with Michael Phelps. So Dan Hicks on the sideline, and then, of course, you have Walton, who was actually on the last game we did as well. Mm-hmm. So that was Kings-Lakers 2002. So a little bit of a run here for Walton when he's doing a lot of important games. He's with Tom Hammond, who, again, I associate with horse racing.
Yeah, exactly.
So and there's some interesting stories about horse racing, Tom Hammond, and Larry Brown associated all with horse racing, which we'll get to later, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But just dropped in the middle of this game. But, yeah, a solid announcer. I don't really – Tom Hammond's okay. You know, I just think they had him doing too many things. I think he did Notre Dame football at one point. Like, he was just NBC's guy. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So wherever they need him to kind of be on, like, the second announcing squad kind of thing. Walton, I think, was very good in this game as well, except for constantly confusing the Antonio and Dale Davis. I thought he was solid again in this game. He was.
He's fun to listen to when he's on, and he was in this game. But this is an interesting feed that we're going to put up on the website at distantreplaypodcast.com because, as I mentioned, you don't never know what you're going to get with a lot of these old games you find on YouTube. Sometimes you get commercials, which is great because you get to kind of go back to that era of time and see what was being promoted, see how different things were culturally. Then sometimes you don't get any commercials, just kind of skips right from end of the segment to the beginning of the next segment. And then sometimes, or rarely, I guess, you get what we had in this game. This feed is actually like the clean feed, no commercials. So you have, when they go to break, you get a little bit of chatter in between. It's exactly what the feed is coming to, I guess, New York, who would broadcast this for NBC. So you got to hear a little bit of chatter in between. We didn't get to hear a lot, but it definitely added a different dynamic. Did you find yourself listening in between, or did you fast forward to the game starting back?
A mixture of both. But it was still interesting to hear the announcers. I mean, we've been in a situation, Ben, where we've had jobs where we've actually been able to get a peek behind the curtain of what these guys say sometimes during the production. I think only one other game we did was like this. I want to say like randomly, like the BC Miami game was like this.
Yeah, I can't remember.
We did one other game like this, but it kind of adds a little bit of a different wrinkle to things, which I enjoyed.
Yeah, and I expected it to be a little bit juicier because this is a great game. And I know the mics aren't always hot, so you don't get everything. But I expected a little more from them. The best thing we got, and I don't know if you were following this, and about midway through the third quarter, Bill Walton's worried about catching his flight out of town. I don't know what he was told by his producer, but he had a 5 o'clock flight, and it was the last flight leaving New York, probably going back to the West Coast. And he was worried about catching his flight, which is something you always hear on these broadcasts, like on Sundays especially, and people are heading back. They always worried about that flight, but like it was like 2 or 3 breaks. He was talking about his flight and then what else is available, like in between this game.
You know what stuck out to me about that is I just had forgotten that like NBC would do this Sunday game. You know what I mean? And then like so the game 2 would be on a different network. You know. Mm-hmm. You always forget that. You figure, why does he need to hop on a plane? Why isn't he just staying there? You know. Right.
So that was interesting throughout. But let's jump into this one. Again, NBC, May 7th, 1995. So this game, I mean, first quarter, you get a sense of how this entire game's going to go in terms of the way it's going to be played. We had 5 technicals in the first quarter, 12 personal fouls total. I don't think I can remember a game that started like this, and it wasn't. You think 5 technicals, and you think, oh my, these guys are going at each other, like maybe a fight or two broke out. But it was really just, it didn't seem like it was anything totally out of the ordinary for a playoff game.
Yeah, it seems within the flow of the game. It was really strange. Like you didn't notice, like, oh wow, 5 technicals, a lot of personal fouls. Now Ben's good to bring this up now because it will become a main storyline throughout the game, the physical play. When you have that happen in the first quarter, you have Charles Oakley and Charles Smith score 16 of the first 18 points for the Knicks. And then, on top of that, you have the score is 29-27 at the end of the first quarter, which is basically an offensive explosion for these two teams. Mm-hmm. Just a very kind of odd first quarter, but the theme throughout is very hotly contested.
And I think the refs were prepared for that and maybe trying to get it under control early because it just seemed like they were quick to blow their whistle on just about everything, both foul-wise. But, again, the technicals – I mean, there's a little bit of complaining, but it seemed maybe they've changed their perspective on things. But especially in the playoffs, everything's heated. Like you got a little more room to kind of react before we're gonna blow the whistle on you. But it didn't seem like they had any room to respond or to foul or whatever it was. It just seemed like as soon as something happened, these officials were on it.
Yeah, and this is prime Joey Crawford. So if you want to see vintage Joey Crawford, go back and watch this game. He's like this is like his Mona Lisa, this game. But, I think the reason why you don't get a lot of reactions from the players, Ben, is I think the coaches had the refs under control. Both these coaches, very well respected, and I think they were kind of taking that role of kind of getting on the refs if the refs needed to be got on, you know?
Yeah.
So I think you saw that with these two teams.
Yeah, I mean, and we didn't touch on coaches. Again, a lot of the stuff is fresh in our mind from our last episode, but you had Pat Riley and Larry Brown. So two of the all-time greatest coaches facing off against each other again in this game. But the first quarter, as you mentioned, that was it. It was fouls and technicals were kind of the highlight. You had Ewing got a tech. They had a double tech on Harper and Jackson. But Indiana did score at the last second of that quarter to take the 29-27 lead. So we're kind of off and running. I was surprised how high scoring it was considering there was no flow. And there was and honestly, Mike, there was no flow throughout this entire game. There was a couple stretches where we'd have some good action, and I guess primarily the Knicks going on some runs. But for the most part, it was just like, okay, here we go again. Down the court, stop. Down the court, stop.
Yeah, and the Pacers got bailed out huge, as we'll talk about, by Rick Smits because they had no offensive flow, like you said. Just kind of what they were known for with Reggie Miller coming off screens and kind of everything running off that. It was an odd game from that standpoint with the offensive flow. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and you mentioned Rick Smits, so let's quickly hit those lineups real fast. So your starters for the Pacers, Dell Davis, Mark Jackson, again, who came over from the Knicks during the offseason, so he has that kind of revenge factor on his mind. Rick Smits, Derek McKee, and Reggie Miller. In the bench, you had Antonio Davis and Byron Scott were the two primary guys that contributed on that side. And then for the Knicks, Charles Oakley, Charles Smith, John Starks, Patrick Ewing, Derek Harper with a solid bench of Anthony Mason, Greg Anthony, and Hubert Davis. This lineup very solid from top to bottom. Is this the best? Nah, what lineup was the best for the Knicks, Mike? This one or later, a little bit later on in the 90s?
This whole run, 93, 94, 95. You have a lot of the same players in the mix.
Okay,
they all had their benefits and drawbacks, but they're all pretty much the same.
So no Larry Johnson and Latrell Sprewell.
That was later in the decade.
Yeah.
No.
You like this team better?
These teams are better, just better teams. You know, yeah. I like LJ and Spree, but you know they got a lot out of the talent they had. This team just had a lot of talent.
Yeah. Well, Rick Smits, as you mentioned, this is a guy that had been solid in his career up to this point. I think 7th year in the league. He's a guy that averaged around 15 points per game was kind of his mark throughout his career. This year, in particularly averaged close to 18, but not a huge score for them. But when you watch this game, Mike, he looked, and it kind of took me back to how I wouldn't say great he was, but how effective he was and just how consistent he was as a player.
Yeah, he was. I mean, I think it was Walton who said at the beginning of the first quarter, he was just super aggressive in this game. Mm-hmm. And he was very skilled. Not just a dunker and let's put back an offensive rebound. This is a guy who could step out a little bit and shoot it. He was not, what you might think of a European player as far as being soft. He was very, when he fouled people, Mm-hmm. And look, they make a point. He wants to stake his claim is look, I'm one of the elite centers in the league. And back then, if you wanted to do that, one of the guys you had to prove yourself against was Ewing.
Yeah.
And how Rick Smits played in this game compared to how Ewing played in this game is a major knock on Ewing and his legacy. It just is.
Yeah,
and how the series would play out also. But
right.
Smits played great. There's no other way to say it.
Played outstanding. So we moved to the second quarter. And again, a lot of the problem with Ewing is he's in foul trouble early on. And that's what kind of does him in. He's got 3 fouls about midway through the second quarter. And credit Smits, too, because he drew a couple on him as Ewing was trying to get position and establish himself on the post. Smits, I think there was some contact, but Smits definitely, acted it out a little bit and drove those fouls, and it got under Ewing's skin.
It did. Yeah. Again, Smits deserves a ton of credit. And just some quick hits here, Ben, I have in the second quarter. The Pacers go on a 9-0 run. Greg Anthony is huge for the Knicks in this quarter. Okay, he's the backup at this point to Derek Harper, as we talked about before. Ewing gets his 3rd foul with 7 minutes left in the second quarter. They mention Reggie Miller has a, quote, sore shoulder, but there's no context given to it at all.
Right.
We don't know what happened. The 6th technical foul of the half is given out in this quarter. The Knicks come back from that 9-0 Pacers run, though, and take the lead 59-54 at halftime, which, again, is on the high end for scoring for this rivalry. But of note, and I thought the biggest thing was Ewing because of the fouls and Miller just because he was off are off to very slow starts, but the teams are scoring points anyway.
Yeah, it was a very weird game in that respect. You went in kind of anticipating certain guys playing big roles, but it was not really that way at all. And yeah, I thought it was interesting too on Miller. I mean, he was on the bench for a decent stretch in that second quarter. He only had 5 points about midway through the second. And again, that report on the sore right shoulder, and it wasn't mentioned before that, coming into the game, hey, watch out for Miller. He's dealing with a sore shoulder. Did it happen during the game? No clue. But it was interesting too, Madison Square Garden. Again, great crowd, great atmosphere and environment, especially this time in the 90s. But at one point, after another technical on the Knicks, the crowd starts chanting, "Let him play." It gets pretty loud, man. It got pretty loud at that point. And and that's the moment you mentioned. Pacers were up 7 when this happened. And all of a sudden, the game kind of turned from that point forward. And the Knicks somehow built a 5-point lead at halftime with a great final 5 minutes or so of this quarter. Maybe the best stretch of basketball, just in terms of not a ton of stoppages, a good flow, some good buckets. But to me, this game was summed up by fouls, technicals, and then these runs, because it seemed like each team would kind of build 5 to 7 point leads, and then next thing you know, it swung the other way.
Yeah, couldn't have put it any better, though. You just put everything perfectly, first of all. But what you said about the last 5 minutes of this half and how good the flow was, it's almost like you were upset that halftime kind of ruined the flow.
Yeah.
But, yeah, this was a game of runs, 59-54 at half.
Yeah, the only other note I had is Ewing's got 2 points at halftime.
Yeah. Ewing we'll get into a stat line at the end of the game. But, again, these fouls, it kind of seemed like I don't want to say Smith's got in his head or the refs got in his head, but I think it might have been a combination of both.
Yeah. So on to the third quarter.
Yeah, so the third quarter I was highlighted for me by a couple things, Ben. That Starks gets hit in the eye, above the eye, kind of like where you see a boxer get cut.
Yep.
And he has in the rest of the game, he has this gigantic eye patch Band-Aid thing above his eye, like right near his eyebrow, which is like, if you just took a picture of that, you would know you're talking about like the 90s NBA.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
It was just a gigantic patch on his eye. Smits, again, is humming along. He's got 19 points midway through the third quarter. Now, this Larry Brown, D. Wayne Lucas, Pat Riley, Tom Hammond stories. Do you want to get into those?
Yeah, dude. Okay. Kentucky Derby was like my almost my big takeaway from the third quarter.
Yeah, so we're the day after the Kentucky Derby here, so that's why this is relevant, and this is why Walton and Hammond are talking about this right now.
And we're on NBC, which I'm sure still had the rights in, and Tom Hammond's the Kentucky Derby guy, so it all fits.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right. So apparently, if you didn't know, Larry Brown is good friends with D. Wayne Lucas, the trainer, and D. Wayne Lucas used to be a basketball coach, which I did not see coming.
Yeah.
Like, who knew D. Wayne Lucas and Larry Brown were friends, and D. Wayne Lucas was a basketball coach because D. Wayne Lucas's horse had won the Kentucky Derby, so that's why they're bringing that up. And then they told a story about Pat Riley, who went to the University of Kentucky, and he had his first time he ever went to the Kentucky Derby. He drove his date in a really nice car. They were dressed to the nines. He brought his car somewhere that he thought was a valet, but it ended up not being a valet, and the guy who he left the car with stole it.
Yeah, amazing story.
Now, as if those two stories aren't interesting enough, we find out that Tom Hammond and Pat Riley were classmates at the University of Kentucky.
Yeah. It was
so there goes your Hammond horse racing connection right there.
It was a wild minute of storytelling. Like had a couple of things stood out to me. I may be the biggest idiot sports fan in the world. I had no clue that Pat Riley went to Kentucky.
Oh, I did. He played for Rupp.
Yeah,
so that was like a thing. Yeah.
I had no idea. Like I just never. Maybe because you pay closer attention to him as a Knicks coach, but I had never heard that kind of in the conversation about him ever. Like it kind of.
He
blew
was
my
in
mind.
that game. You know why I knew it, Ben? I believe he was in that famous game against Texas Western.
Okay.
Remember that?
Yeah.
That movie was based on. I think that's why I knew it.
Yeah. So that to me, I was like, he actually went to Kentucky. But yeah, I think they mentioned he was driving a Corvette, like a convertible Corvette. I want to say it was like and I think Walton was like, how was he driving that car in college?
A tale as old as time. Kentucky players driving around in nice cars, enjoying life.
But the fact that he dropped it off, he had his girlfriend with him, his date with him, and dropped it off in his car. He never saw it again. That's an incredible story. But yeah, Tom Hammond and Pat Riley went to school at Kentucky at the same time. We learned a lot. Learned a lot about that. Who would have guessed that was one of the biggest takeaways from this game was what we learned about the Kentucky Derby and horse racing.
Yeah.
Who knows? But let's get back to it. Third quarter. So as this game goes along too, you mentioned Reggie got off to a slow start. Reggie can kind of is slowly heating up. Like he doesn't just outright take over, but you can kind of see him kind of getting it together a little bit. But in the third quarter too, things got a little bit heated as well and more physical. He had a bench tech on the Pacers. Hey, another technical, big surprise. Oakley kind of went to the bench. Guy got to grab his jersey to pull him back, and he slapped the hand down, and a little bit of shoving ensued. And then you had another T, Antonio Davis shoving Harper on the other end. Both guys got ejected, which again, when I saw this, I was like,
huge.
Listen, it's a hard foul, and he pushed the guy off of him. Like, you know what? You separate the guys and you go your own way, right? I didn't feel like there was a need for a double technical. Flagrant foul also called on Harper, and they both got ejected. I thought that was overkill.
It turned into the Joey show, like I said before. That was Joey Crawford. You saw him explaining everything to the coaches, just like his moment in the sun.
Oh, yeah. Talking to
this
Larry,
was huge.
Too. Larry.
Yeah.
Larry, quiet Larry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Unreal. It was just, and the only reason why this upsets me is because losing Derek Harper is a lot bigger deal than losing Antonio Davis.
Right.
So now the Knicks, I mean, look, Greg Anthony played very well. I'm not taking that away from him, but some plays and how they went down the stretch of this game, like we're talking about, I think might have ended up differently if Derek Harper was in the game. So it's a huge loss for the Knicks. We're up to 9 technical fouls, okay, for the game. We have, at the beginning of the fourth quarter, we get to 47 personal fouls about halfway through the fourth quarter. The only NBA playoff game that has ever had more than that was a 4 overtime game.
Yeah, think about that. That's crazy.
And we're in the middle of the fourth quarter.
Yeah, just it's wild. And the Pacers at this point too, they built a 9-point lead. So again, they were down 5 at halftime. They built a 9-point lead in this third quarter through all this. But the Knicks do manage to kind of put a little run together and cut it to 3 at the end of the quarter. So you have another tight game going back and forth. And it's still, watch this game, it's still hard. Like, I never thought the Knicks could pull away to the point where we had Reggie Miller do what he was doing. Like, it's a very odd game. It was totally different than what I expected going back to watch it from start to finish. But as we move to the fourth quarter, same kind of thing. But early on in this one thing that I did watch during one of the breaks, they go to timeout. They pull back. It's a wide shot of the arena. They have a video going. I hear like the fans doing the "Go New York Go," and I didn't really know this song, Mike, very well. I'm sure you probably do.
That's a classic.
But I immediately stopped the game, went to YouTube, pulled up, and just searched "Go Knicks Go," and like the first video is like 1994 "Go Knicks Go." I was like, boom! It must not have been around a long time. But that video was incredible. That, like, the shots of the fans, the players doing it, and then you heard the arena kind of reacting to it. That was awesome.
Yeah, so that's the song. Go New York, go New York, go. Yeah, every Knicks fan knows that. Yeah, it's a classic.
I loved it. That was one of my big takeaways early in this. But over 50 fouls as we get through this quarter. Over 50 fouls. Again, so tough to watch that. But as we move through this quarter, it was big for the Pacers because they kept losing guys here towards the end. Smits fouled out with a playoff career high at 34. I think McKee fouled out. Like, the Pacers now, as they have a lead for most of this quarter, but the Knicks kind of start to grab it. Like, they're losing guys. All the momentum is in the Knicks' favor.
It is, yeah. We're tied at 84 halfway through the quarter. Miller at that point is just, with 5 minutes left in the game, is only 4 of 15 from the field. Okay? Although his stats will look good at the end of the game, that's important to keep in mind. Greg Anthony, like I mentioned, is clutch down the stretch and has helped building that Knicks lead. You mentioned about Smits fouling out. Before we get to the last kind of sequence here, which I know we want to talk about, the timeout by Oakley with a little over a minute left, it was like one of those things where he was going out of bounds and called timeout.
Yeah.
That was the Knicks' last timeout, and I thought it was low-key. Besides for the Reggie heroics, might have been the most important play of the game.
Yeah, I think they mentioned that too, right? Like, you said the last time out there, I think they kind of pointed out.
Yeah, they pointed it out, and we'll go through how this game ends, and I'll let you know why I think it was such an important play. But I know we want to get to – and the announcers at this point are making it sound like the game is over, by the way, too, because the Knicks are up 6 points with 18 seconds left.
Well, when we did that Winning Time documentary, Donnie Walsh said, like, he was up there in the suite or whatever, and when they got up 6, he went to the bathroom, was like getting ready to leave. Like, he was like, it's over, we lost this game 1, like, here we go again. And like, everybody kind of felt that way. Like, that was, I mean, nothing signaled the Pacers having a chance to kind of come back here. And we saw it. They got the inbound down 6 with 18 seconds left. The inbound it, Reggie hits that kind of step back, fadeaway 3. And then Mason takes the inbounds, looking for a guy. Greg Anthony slips. He's double teamed. As he's falling inbounds, like, Mason just has to get rid of it and throws it right to Reggie, who steps back, hits another 3. I'm assuming that's where you thought the timeout would be used.
That is one time where they could have called a timeout.
So
that's the first time and the biggest time, obviously.
Right.
There's multiple times they could have called a timeout there. As soon as you saw Anthony Mason taking the ball out, you could have called a timeout. As soon as Anthony Mason was fumbling around and leaning in, someone could have called a timeout there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So multiple times in this play. So now we have a situation where we're tied up because Reggie just hit 2 threes in 5 seconds to tie the game. With the game tied and the Knicks with no timeouts, remember, the Knicks would have had to take it down now to the last shot. The Pacers foul. That was a crazy sequence.
Mm-hmm.
Now they foul Starks. Starks goes to the line, and Wright and Q misses both.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible that he missed both those free throws. And a guy that, you assume is kind of like the guy you'd want at the line, right? That's the guy.
Probably for the next year. But, he misses both. Ewing gets the ball, an offensive rebound with a point blank putback. And instead of like going, I'm not criticizing Patrick Ewing, but he had a bad series in terms of putbacks. But like, instead of going up and trying to dunk the ball or lay it in, he takes like a 7-foot jumper. He misses. And then inexplicably again, now we're tied still. The Knicks foul Reggie Miller.
Yeah. Yeah, it was.
It's just a crazy sequence, man. And I know all the attention goes to Reggie Miller and those 2 threes, which obviously are the biggest part of this. But there's other plays that happen here that were just mind-bending.
Yeah, that I think in Ewing's defense, I'm assuming that he just kind of thought like time's running down. Like I don't want to take a chance of holding this ball too long.
Yeah.
Although it wasn't that tight on the time. But yeah, this whole sequence, like I can't describe it any other way than like a complete collapse. Because then Miller makes 2 free throws, and then they get the ball back, and Anthony's driving down the court, and he gets bumped, which I thought could have been a foul.
Second time though, Ben, you call a timeout after that spot, and you get the ball to half court.
Yeah. True.
This is huge again, too, with the timeouts.
Yeah.
You can't set up a play. You have a backup point guard in there.
Yep.
It's just
And Mason goes to the floor, and the time runs out. I mean, there could not be there. I don't know that there's a worse 20 seconds for a team in NBA playoff history. Like, legitimately.
It's been well documented for the last 25 years. There isn't.
I mean, you think about, like, all I think about not being a Knicks fan is just Reggie hitting couple of shots, right? But I mean, you forget about everything else that had to happen for them to actually win that game.
And you got to remember, the biggest underlying thing here, Ben, is now in the Pacers' minds, they've exercised the demons of winning at the Garden.
Yeah, and you could see that in Reggie's post-game interview. He literally said, I feel like we can sweep these guys.
Yeah, I mean,
he said that in a post-game interview.
It just changed everything. I mean, we know how this series would end up. It would end up with Ewing with another putback in Game 7 to win it, and he would miss it. So the Pacers got 2 games at the Garden in the series, and just one of those ones that really kind of is known for the Reggie heroics, but there was a lot of other points in this game where the Knicks could have won it.
Yeah, the way this series started and finished, man, that's tough. That is tough for a Knicks fan, no doubt. But in this game, just to kind of recap the box score here, Rick Smits had 34. He had the most shots on the Pacers. Reggie had 31. Derek McKee had 12. And on the other side for the Knicks, it was pretty balanced scoring. I mean, honestly, Starks had 21, but you had 7 guys in double figures. So pretty balanced effort.
You had the 7-foot center, 4 of 15, 26% shooting, 11 points and 10 rebounds. So again, this was Ewing. This was probably the worst Ewing's ever played in a big game.
5 personal fouls.
I love Patrick Ewing's one of my favorite players ever, but.
Yeah,
he just came up short today.
By the way, and I put this on Instagram, I had no clue that John Starks set NBA records for most 3-pointers made and most three-point attempts this season.
I had no idea either. Yeah, I just found out just now.
Oh, that stat, they popped that stat up on the screen, and I could not believe it. And it's changed so much. Like, this is 95. I think he's outside of the top 30 in both now. That's how much the game's changed.
Wow. Yeah, that's good to bring up.
Yeah. Well, as we mentioned, the Pacers would go on to lose in the Eastern Conference Finals in 7 games to the Magic. The Magic would go on to lose in the finals. But an awesome game. I mean, in terms of the finish, I just thought it just overall was a weird game with all the fouls, the kind of the back and forth. Just an odd game all around. Definitely different than what I expected going back.
Yeah, it was a lot different than I expected going back. There's parts of this game I had forgotten, even though we've seen countless highlights of it over the years, and just a great one to go back and watch.
By the way, as we kind of wrap this thing up, I always love these 90s games because we get to hear the music being played in the arenas. Man, it takes you back to that era when these are tracks we kind of play at a barbecue now or a cookout. And they're playing in there, and and you think about it being these are the hits that are on the charts right now. I love it.
Yeah, that is a
Pump
cool,
Up the Jam was going at one point.
Pump Up the Jam. Yeah.
It's tremendous.
Pump up the jam, pump it up.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's get out of here, Mike. Again, subscribe to the show, please, on whatever platform you listen to us on. Also on YouTube as well. We got plenty of stuff coming up. But if you have any recommendations on games, true crime, any of that, send it over to us. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, keep those suggestions coming. We value them a lot. And we'll see you next week for our wrap-up of Secretariat's 1973 Triple Crown run. Until next time.